These are things you have to learn by standing by someone's side, you know. Even if I remember trying to ask her to, well, how much are you using, Grandma? And she didn't know. She just could eyeball it, and you had to watch her do it. And we didn't pay close enough attention. We should have. So it's lost. So, yeah. So things get taught from generation to generation.
4 years ago, I started reading a bit about the American food industry and became more conscious of what I was eating. When I left my home in California to come to school in Boston, I stopped eating red meat, but I also made an exception for my mother's brisket. Now that I'm living on my own, shopping and cooking and celebrating holidays away from home, I thought it was time for me to learn how to cook my family's traditional brisket recipe. But just as those who prepared the dish before me added their own personality to the recipe, I knew I would do the same. I set out to learn how to prepare my mother's recipe, determining that I would be the first in the modern era to prepare it with sustainably raised, local beef.
So let me tell you my joke about a brisket. So there's this young woman who decides she's going to make a brisket. And she calls her mother and says, Mom, I'm going to make a brisket. She says, oh, that's great. Let me give you the recipe. So she dictates the recipe to her. You put in this and you put in that, and this is how long you cook it. And she says, oh, and very, very important. You need to cut the end off the brisket. She said, well, why would I have to cut the end of the brisket? She says, I don't know. That's how you make a brisket. She said, yeah, but where does that come from? She says, well, that's how my mother told me. Call your grandmother. So a woman calls her grandma and says, Grandma, I said, oh, it's so nice to hear from you, darling. What can I do for you? She says, well, I'm going to make a brisket. She's like, do you need the recipe? She says, no, Mom gave me the recipe. She goes, oh, very important. Make sure you cut the end off the brisket. She says, what's this cutting the end off the brisket? Why do I have to cut the end off the brisket? She says, that's how you make a brisket. She said, yeah, my mom told me that, but why? She says, that's how I've always made it. That's how my mother taught me. Call your great-grandmother. That you go visit her. She'd like to visit. So I'll go visit her. So she goes to visit her great-grandmother, who, thank God, she's 102. She's still got her wits about her. She's very vibrant. She says, oh, darling, it's so nice to see you. She says, Grandma, it's great-grandma, it's so nice to see you, too. She said, but I have a question. I'm making a brisket. She goes, it's wonderful, but don't forget to cut off the end. She says, great-grandma, that's why I'm here. Mom told me, and Grandma told me that you had to cut the end of the brisket. Why? She goes, well, when I was a kid, we had a pot that was this big. The brisket would be this big. You have to cut the end of the brisket, and then it fits in the pot. That is the famous brisket joke. It also is a very telling way that we sometimes come up with traditions and stick to them, no matter what, even if we don't know why we do them.
So, first of all, I always order it in advance because usually when I'm making a brisket, it's around a holiday and everybody else is also ordering at the same time, and you don't want to show up and find out that they ran out. So, I always ask the butcher, I tell him how many people I'm serving. I'm having 8 people, and he'll tell me how much to order. Now, they always sell you more than you need, but that's good because then there's leftovers, and brisket can freeze, so it's good to have leftovers. Or you often have hungry college students or somebody at the table that you send home with a care package, so it's not a bad thing to have extra.
All right, so we're going for the brisket. This is Drager's, best meat in town.
How are you?
I'm okay. I
reserved a regular brisket, not corned beef brisket. The name is Siegel, S-I-E-G-E-L. So, yeah, so you have to make sure that it's regular brisket, not corned beef brisket. It happens to be that tomorrow's St. Patrick's Day, so they thought I was going to get corned beef brisket, but wrong. We're having regular brisket. All right.
Anything else for you?
Well, actually, I was wondering if you could please open it and then take the fat off for me.
Sure.
Okay, thanks. Okay, let's take a look at it.
Too much fat.
Yeah, that one's okay. But here, if you can take as much fat off as you can.
And that will be good?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, thank you. I like the fact is that probably, you don't take all of the fat off. You want to have some of it on there because it's part of what keeps it moist. Like a really good piece of meat or steak is marbled because it has fat in it. So it's, I guess the fat melts while it cooks and keeps the meat moist. Okay, this is kind of a fancy grocery store. It has the best meat in town. So I don't usually shop here for other things, but I come for the brisket.
And it gets you buying other things.
Well, I guess so. The other thing that's really important, I forgot to tell you, is you have to ask them for a large plastic bag, because when we marinate it tonight, it's going to smell like garlic in the refrigerator, and so I wrap it back up, but I ask them for a couple of plastic bags and try to double bag it so the whole refrigerator doesn't smell like garlic. I didn't know I needed such pepper spit. All right.
Anything else for you?
No, that's fine. I was wondering, do you have an extra plastic bag like this that I can have? Thank you.
Okay. Do you know anything about where the meat is from?
Where does the meat come from? Where do you guys buy the meat?
Yes, I have all the signs here.
Oh.
Oh.
Where all the meats come from.
Oh.
Wow. Brisket, product of USA. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, so it's from
Pretty much everything is domestic. So.
Okay.
Do you know where in the U.S. it comes from, or who the
Midwest.
Midwest. Oh, okay. Thank you. Cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Finding local, sustainable meat in the Boston area was not too difficult. A quick internet search brought me to a great grassroots community site with all of the grass-fed cattle farms in the state. I learned that grass-fed beef was readily available at my local Somerville Winters Farmers Market. Just a 15-minute bike ride away, I was instantly transported out of the Tufts bubble and soon discovered that the Somerville community is actually quite active in the local food movement. It was wonderful to speak with the farmers directly and encouraging that they were so willing to talk about their farms and their farming techniques. All of the farmers had been in the business for decades, one for more than 3 generations. I spoke extensively with Kate Stillman of Stillman Farms, located in Hardwick, Massachusetts, just about 2 hours' drive from Somerville.
My parents' place is across the way. I'm pointing in the market here. But they have a farm in the next town over, fruits and vegetables. And, you know, my father's owned that for 30 plus years. And of course, he grew up on a dairy farm, so there's actually kind of a strong tradition of farming in my background.
The Stillman Farm offers conscientiously raised beef, lamb, pork, chicken, eggs, and turkeys. Though their farm is pretty sizable for Massachusetts, Kate's farm is measured in acres, while Midwestern farms are measured in hectares. They sell their products at local farmers markets, meat meetups, and through a community-supported agricultural program. Meeting with her at the Somerville Farmers Market, it was clear that Kate knows her customers as well as her animals.
You know, people see me, they know I eat my product, they can come find me. You know, we put out a good product.
I was searching for local, sustainable meat, 2 parameters that are fairly specific but also hard to define. Sustainable is often thought to go hand in hand with the organic label, but Kate was quick to explain that there's more to ethical farming practices.
Organic doesn't mean chemical-free. It burns me when consumers think it means chemical-free, and I think it's just because people want sort of the answers. They want it instantaneously to be perfect and good for their bodies. You know, it just means no synthetically made chemicals. I think the question is, you know, what are your practices? What are you spraying? Do you spray? You know, what's your belief system? What's your approach to all this? Just because my animals aren't certified organic doesn't mean I'm not taking care of them correctly. And organic doesn't always give you the results you want. I mean, it's funny, I know crops and I know farmers that end up spraying their stuff more to fit within organic standards. You know, organic, it gets into crazy. You know, there is no local source of organic hay to feed my animals. So even if I bought all the organic grain in the world, which by the way is probably being manufactured at the same plant, you know what I mean? Like you're still, it's grain. You're having to go outside the source to get, you know, feed for your animals. The only organic source I know of hay is Canada. Why would I go to Canada and buy hay when I can buy it down the street from my neighbors? And that's why I don't believe in the organic label. I think it pushes you to do things that aren't necessarily in the best spirit of, you know, being a good community member as well.
I went next to a staple in the Boston meat community, Savinor's Butcher and Meat Market. Known as the best on the block since 1939, this is where Julia Child famously sourced her meat. The establishment offers the neighborhood butcher shop tradition with the best prime meats, game, poultry, and fish from local sources. They maintain strong connections with their farmers and house some of the best butchers in New England.
You know, for a young butcher, sort of like the penultimate goal to work in a place like this. So,
what is so great about this place as far in the...
Something that's great about this place is that all of our meat is sourced from the highest quality and very specific locations. Rhonda's specific farms, even the USDA prime stuff that he works with, to make sure that we're not sourcing anything that's like no factory raised cattle. Everything, even the USDA prime stuff, is grazed and then corn finished just to achieve the level of marbling necessary for a USDA prime rating. This place is different than a lot of other meat shops. Like, I can tell you where exactly all the chicken comes from. I can tell you the names of some of the farmers that we work with, Ray and Linda Buck at Archer Farms. You don't get that at a lot of other places. The meat comes in boxes, cryovac bags. You take it out, you maybe trim a little fat off and throw it in a tray, and that's all you think about it if you work at, say, a Stop and Shop or a Shaw's, even a Whole Foods or something like that. And so it's great to actually work with, you know, whole animal breakdown and learn the best from the best, you know, experienced meat cutters like Brian in the business. So.
Can you tell the difference in the meat when you're working with it?
Absolutely. There's actually not only a textural difference from an animal that's well raised, and that's the meat's firm. It's actually easier to work with than a factory raised animal with very low amounts of intramuscular fat, which is where all the flavor in meat comes from. You get limp, really lean, limp pork chops, and they're actually more frustrating to work with than or any, you know, any cut of pork. But it's actually more frustrating to cut as a meat cutter, low quality meat than high quality meat. So it's.
Andrew emphasized the local nature of their butcher shop and the relationship that they have with their farmers.
Some of our farmers up in Vermont that we get our Vermont raised Wagyu cows from, they come down, we talk to them. Ray and Linda Buck come down, we talk with them, and it's great. The fact is that for stuff like this, you do pay a little bit more to ensure the quality and to be able to talk to a butcher about where your meat comes from and, you know, sourcing and how it's fed and things like that. Unfortunately, you pay a little bit more. Hopefully, we're moving to a point where that's considered the norm, but when people receive the level of knowledge and service that they get here, and the fact that all day, right up until 8 o'clock, they can talk to a butcher and have something specially done for them, you know, people always, they say, oh, you know, a couple extra dollars a pound, that's, you know, what else am I going to spend my couple extra dollars a pound on?
Yeah. Kate Stillman also commented on the extra cost associated with sustainable local food. She explained that when she shops for groceries, she doesn't let price determine the food she buys.
You're coming here because you need to know your food. And, you know, if I had to leave on one point, food, it's not broken in this country. I don't want to be so dramatic and say broken. I think our idea and attitude about food is a little broken and damaged. And it's not gasoline. It's food. It's food. And, you know, you would never go to a doctor and say to your doctor, give me the, if your child has cancer, give me the cheapest coverage I can get for my money. You would never say that. And so it burns me in this country when people think they're going to go get the cheapest food they can get off the grocery store shelves, because it's food. It's really central to all of our lives. And I think when you ask human beings to do things that you're not willing to do, if you're not going to raise an animal yourself, because let me tell you, it's not easy. It's 24/7. I have a kid, so I understand what motherhood's about too. No, sometimes the animals are worse. They're more demanding, tougher. I've spent an entire last 2 weeks not sleeping at all, up in the barns all night. You know, lambs in the kitchen by the fire with me, and bottles, and you name it, and a stack of clothes that probably shouldn't even go through the washing machine. That's reality. That's part of life. But I think if you're not willing to do that process yourself, then probably you shouldn't be eating meat. Or if you're not willing to pay for it. That was the second piece of that. Because the thing about it is, you probably aren't going to go get a cow or get a lamb and have it, but, you know, you then at least should go to somebody that's willing to do it and be willing to pay them the price for their time and their effort.
Before I set out to cook my own brisket, I went to talk with some of the best-known brisket chefs in the greater Boston area. I had the opportunity to taste their recipes and see why brisket is such an iconic part of the traditional Jewish cuisine. My first stop was Zaftig's Deli in Natick, Massachusetts.
Zaftig's was opened by Bob Schumann in Brookline. Our first location will be 15 years old this summer, in June. And he based it, we have a logo, and it says Voluptuous Women, and Zaftig's means pleasantly plump in Yiddish, and it applies to women, children, food. So our portion sizes are a little larger than normal. But it's all about comfort food and classic Jewish food. The beef is coming from, I just asked him about the pastrami, and it's all the same. It's the Midwest, Missouri, Mississippi, that area. We have our brisket dinner that comes with kosher vaniskas, and we also have brisket sandwiches, and we have barbecue brisket quesadilla, just regular barbecue brisket. But the most popular, when people think brisket, they think about the brisket dinner. And most people do come in. We're in the middle of Passover. We'll be wrapping it up this weekend, and one of the two proteins offered on our menu, our Passover menu, was brisket. So we sell a lot of it. We used to make it ourselves, but now we just actually finished cooking the product here. We were going through so much of it, and we didn't have the space to keep up with production, that we have an outside company called Boston Brisket, located right in Boston. They're a meat company, and they came and worked with our marinade recipe with us really close, and they're able to reproduce what we're able to do. And they give it to us, and we cook it in-house, but we no longer prep it in-house, but it's still handmade by a small company.
The head chef, Jose, outlined this process in a little more detail.
We have it during the morning, our own cook on their own juices, and then in the afternoon, when it's cooled down, we pre-portion it, and then we were ready to cook it. We heat it up in a sauté pan with brisket gravy, and then we put on a plate, and that's it. With the side dish that they wanted, potato salad, coleslaw, mashed potato, or whatever they want. Instead of veggies, it will be. That's all.
I had the pleasure of tasting the barbecue brisket at Zaftig's, and it was a wonderful sensory experience. From the moment it was placed in front of me, its incredible fragrance made my taste buds quiver. Though its texture and juiciness was reminiscent of my mother's brisket, the flavors were entirely different. The schmaltzy background music set the mood, and the side of potato salad and pickle brought back a flood of associations with the numerous Jewish delis I've eaten at since my childhood. I went next to Ina's kitchen in Newton, Massachusetts. In less than a year's time, Ina and her son Alex have established their small shop as one of the best Jewish delis in town. When I walked in, Ina was flipping through a New Yorker article titled "The Borscht Belt," with a cookbook and catering orders spread across a big kitchen table. I knew I was in a Jewish mother's kitchen.
And people really like homemade food because everything made from scratch. The whole policy what we had, we still keeping that policy. We sell what we can make. I always wanted to have something on my own, have a business to work for yourself, and my passion is cooking. That's the only thing I can do the best, so.
Ina's brisket was absolutely delicious. It melted on my tongue before I could even close my mouth. Less salty than my family's recipe, the meat had absorbed the sweetness of the broth more fully than a sponge. This could only be the result of a truly dedicated, slow-cooked recipe.
Biggest secret is just to put the prunes, about a pound of prunes for 5 pounds of brisket.
Wow.
So, and it has to cook in 2 days. First day you cook, you cut the next day and finish cooking. You kind of cook it. It is all tender already, but you slice it and you reheat in it. But it takes about an hour anyway, or in the oven. So I call it continue cooking.
Yeah.
When Ina first opened her restaurant, she sourced her meat from a farm in Vermont, but she soon learned that her customers preferred kosher meat to local meat. It's too expensive to keep a glatt kosher restaurant, but by keeping milk and meat separate, Ina is able to cater to the young conservative Jews in the area who eat kosher style. This demand for kosher meat doesn't seem to overlap much with the locavore movement in the Boston area, and I came to discover that there are no kosher cattle slaughterhouses in New England. Only days before I was set to serve my family's brisket to a gathering of friends, I realized that what I was planning to prepare wouldn't be kosher. I had determined that sustainable meant local, and local meant cows raised in New England. Without any kosher slaughterhouses in New England, kosher local meat is an oxymoron in Boston. Growing up, my family never kept kosher. The meat from Draeger's was never kosher, and so I determined that making a kosher brisket was not as important to me as making a sustainable brisket. Keeping in mind all that I had learned from Kate Stillman, I ordered my meat from Andrew at Savinore's and prepared it with Zaftig's and Ina's variations in the back of my mind. However, my most important inspiration came from my mom.
I'm sitting here telling you how to make brisket.
Why?
Well, because it's, you know, all the years of making it, I always thought that that it's important to teach things about culture and things from generation to generation, and you know, just have memories of learning from my mother, and I'm sure she learned from her mother, and to whether it was polishing the silver or, you know, making the brisket, and it's just very touching to me to do this. So I usually put the garlic down first. It's easier for the salt to stick on top of. And so you take about half of it. So basically, this is about 2.5 tablespoons of, I don't know what the actual recipe says, just because I don't want my hands to really, so one of the things, I could always tell my mother made brisket just because you could smell the garlic on her hands and onions for days afterwards. And to some extent there will be some of that, but it's really quite pervasive. So, do you want to do some of this? Sure. Go ahead. So you want to spread it out evenly. You don't want to have big clumps anyplace. Try and get every part of it, at least having touched the garlic, covered, and make sure you get the edges too.
But not the side? The
sides? Yeah, the sides too. All of the outer spaces you want to have. And so what you're going to see basically is when we cut it, you cut it against the grain. You don't cut it with the grain or it gets tough and stringy. So you're going to cut it. That shows you which way to cut it. You're going to cut it this way.
Okay.
Not this way. Cut it against the grain. Okay? And then you're going to add, it looks like a lot of salt, but you do add a lot of salt to cover it and it kind of gets into the meat. So,
what, do you know what the salt, is there a flavor aspect to it?
Yeah, it flavors the meat.
And then does it also
tenderizes it too, I think, to some extent. Alright, so then, this is where your hands will smell like garlic no matter what you do. You have to do the other side. So, here we go. Yeah, I don't want it all clumped in one area, so spread that out. It's too much and then get on the edges here too.
You're trying to get it like in the...
No, but I think, meat is not flat. Okay, that's good enough. Alright, and this is where I usually ask for someone's help because you want to fold the ends of the bag open so you fold it and I'm going to toss the meat in. Doesn't matter, it can be folded in. There you go. And so, and seal it pretty tightly because you don't want like your eggs and things like that in the refrigerator to smell like garlic. So even though you like the smell, the rest of it doesn't. Okay, so this is why I asked for an extra plastic bag, is you want to little bag it. First take about a tablespoon of margarine and melt it on the bottom of the pot. Take one onion that you've chopped pretty finely and you cook the onion not till it's sweating and it's clear, but you don't want it to be brown. You're basically seasoning the pot and the onion actually turns sweeter from when you saute it like that. Once you've done that, and that should probably take about 3 to 5 minutes tops, you turn the oven off and you take the onion and you put it in a small bowl on the side. You want to try to get all the pieces of the onion out because you're next going to put the meat in to brown the meat, and if there's any pieces of onion left, they will kind of burn and can be sort of bitter, so you want to try and get it all out. So then you unwrap the brisket from the 2 bags that it's been in overnight, and you actually need probably 2 large forks. Not a regular fork that you eat dinner with, but the kind that you might barbecue with, that you can hold on to it, because you're going to want to place the meat into the pot, and it will probably, only part of it will have contact with the bottom because it's a big piece of meat. So for about a minute you rest the meat in there. You're cooking it on a medium flame. The idea is to sear it, and you're going to seal every single exposed outer part of the beef before you actually start to cook it. So you cook it, it's in the pot for 2 to 3 minutes, and then you take the forks and you either flip it over, or you sometimes have to really be quite adept at holding both forks at once and balancing the meat so that it gets seared. So both sides, and then also try to do as much of the edges as you possibly can. Once that's done, you can put the onions back in, and you're going to put chicken broth in, and you want to just about cover the meat. So depending on the size of your pot will depend on how much chicken broth you're going to need, because you really are going to cook it on a low flame for several hours, 3.5 hours. You also put in a couple of things. You put in about 2 tablespoons of honey. I don't have the recipe in front of me. And you put in about 2 or 3 tablespoons of brown sugar. What else goes in there? Oh, the most important thing I forgot. You have to put a cork in the water, okay? And a cork from a wine bottle. Now, don't use a plastic cork because it'll melt. That's only been a new problem in the last 10 years since there have been plastic corks. But it has to be a cork. And my mother always did that, and she said that it would make the meat more tender. Who knows? If it's probably a bubba mice, it doesn't mean anything. But you do it because it works.
Have you ever not put a cork in?
Yeah, and actually it was tougher, but maybe that was my imagination. I don't know. Okay, so you have the cork in there, you have the honey, and because you want the meat to kind of get this sweetness as it's cooking. And after the 2 hours, at that point, this is the trick because it's hot. You take those forks again and you turn the flame off so you don't burn yourself while you're doing this, and you actually try and flip the meat over to the other side so that it's being cooked evenly. And at that point, I take a pretty large sweet potato. You peel, cut into chunks probably about 1.5 inches. I put in, I don't know what the recipe is. I eyeball it. I know how much it is. I can't tell you. But it's like 2 big handfuls of prunes that are pitted, which means that there's no pits in it. 2 big handfuls of apricots, and 2 big handfuls of peeled and you could put nowadays the baby carrots. They didn't used to have baby carrots available in bags. We used to peel all the carrots, but you want them to be about the same size as a prune would be, or around that size. You put the carrots and the prunes and the apricots and the sweet potatoes in. And you don't put them in from the beginning because they'll get mushy and they'll like fall apart at that point. So then for another hour, maybe an hour and a half, depending on the size of the brisket, you continue to cook it again with the lid on again. I would bring it up to a boil again to make sure that the potatoes are going to be at a hot enough temperature that they'll actually cook, and then bring it down to a simmer. You can tell if it's done by sticking those forks in. You can see if it's tender or not. The fork should be able to slide in pretty easily and come out without too much give. So when it's done, you turn the flame off, and you're going to, with those forks, lift the meat onto a cutting board. And you're not going to cut it yet. You cover it with aluminum foil and let it rest for at least 10 minutes, maybe more if you have it. It's best if it's actually cool, because otherwise it'll fall apart when you try to cut it. After the meat has rested, you're going to cut the meat. You want to try to make it as thin as possible because it's more tender. At this point, some of the meat is so tender it's falling apart anyway. And the most delicious part, in my opinion, are the end pieces. That's the cook's prerogative. I usually take a piece of that myself, taste it, make sure it's good. The other thing is I often give a taste to my children or my husband, and I always say I need to have a taster. Somebody has to taste this for me, even though it's already cooked. I'm not going to do anything different. But you were like a bird with your mouth open, like, you would sit there and cup your, it's like that was my pleasure to give you a taste of the first taste of the brisket. Okay, so you cut it on against the grain, otherwise it'll fall apart. Either you have to have a really, really sharp knife or you'll ruin the whole thing, or an electric knife. And this is when you take the pot, which now has all of those vegetables floating around in it, and you take a slotted spoon and you spoon the prunes and the onions and the apricots, and you layer them on top of the meat. And there is usually far more broth than you need to keep. You just want to put enough broth to about halfway up the side of the meat. Otherwise, it's going to slosh all over the place. And then you serve it, and you enjoy it, and you enjoy everybody enjoying it. And you have enough left over, perhaps, to freeze. And then the best part is when you go through your freezer and you go, ah, there's brisket. It's like you don't have to do all the potching to put it together, and you can serve brisket for dinner some night. It's like, great. What a treat, because you don't have to do all the work, and then there's brisket for dinner.
That was it. The Neufeld-Snyderman-Joseph Siegel brisket had officially become the Neufeld-Snyderman-Joseph Siegel brisket. All that was left was to enjoy it with friends. I prepared the big meal with my girlfriend Rosie. Rosie was with me throughout the entire process, helping to film so I could become fully immersed in the ethnographic process. Together, we prepared a full meal, including fiddleheads with roasted olive oil and garlic, a spinach cheese dip, pasta with fresh mozzarella and tomatoes, and mashed sunchokes using chives from the Tufts Library roof garden. The mozzarella was handmade the day before and purchased at the Somerville Winter Farmers Market, along with the sunchokes, the fiddleheads, and the carrots used in the brisket. Rosie made a strawberry cake, and I invited some friends over to taste the first sustainable brisket of my generation.